Okay, J.L. Mackie, The Argument from Queerness. Yes, queerness. It's the old-fashioned sense of queerness, kind of like the way they use gay in the Flintstones song. Queerness just means oddness, weirdness in this context. It's a very short argument that's part of his book, Ethics: Inventing Right and Wrong, the title of which kind of gives you a clue where he's coming from. His theory is sometimes called error theory, which is because it says that moral claims we make, like cruelty is wrong, have an implied reference to moral facts, and there are no moral facts. So as he says, he contrasts his view of moral claims with the view of the logical positivists, most clearly presented by A.J. Ayer in Language, Truth and Logic. A.J. Ayer, remember, was defending the verification principle of meaning. That is, that unless a statement is just true by the definition of the words involved, they're analytic, if they are synthetic, if they're making a claim about the world, then it's only meaningful insofar as there are circumstances that are relevant to the truth or falsity of that sentence. So, famously, Ayer said he was not an atheist because an atheist says the statement God exists is false, whereas Ayer said, I think the statement God exists is meaningless, because for it to be meaningful there would have to be facts that would prove or disprove it, that would settle the issue of whether or not it's true, and of course there aren't, so therefore it has no meaning. It's literally meaningless. Mackie says that's not my view, and Mackie is writing in the 70s when the verification principle has long since been torn to shreds by various people, including Quine and Popper and all those guys. What I think is that moral statements are just false. They say something that is not true. So, does that mean that he doesn't believe there is morality? Well, that's a complicated question. Certainly, he doesn't believe that there's morality in the common sense understanding of that. So, it's worth looking at, very briefly, different theories about the nature of morality. Moral realism is the view that there is a genuine fact about the universe that determines that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. That there is something about the world that makes cruelty is wrong true. There is a realness to moral properties, that in some sense an act of cruelty has about it some feature that makes it genuinely, really wrong. Now, the question then is, what is this feature? And in what senses is it part of the world? Clearly, it doesn't seem to be part of the world that science understands. Often the claim is made that there's a fact-value distinction, that science just tells us the way the world is, the facts of the matter, and it doesn't tell us anything about the way the world should be. Those are two different things. So where does the shouldness come from? Because that's the subject matter of ethics. Where does the shouldness enter the picture? Well, if you're a moral realist, it's there in the world. And if science can't study it, that doesn't mean it's not there. There are other things that science can't study that we are realists about. For example, numbers. You can't put numbers under a microscope. You can say that there are things of a certain number, but numbers themselves, seem to be beyond the ability of science to investigate. This strategy of saying, hey, there are other things just as weird that we're committed to, in this short section, Mackie says this is where you seek companions in guilt. That is, moral realists who respond to the argument from Queerness. One way to respond is saying, yeah, well, but we're no worse off than other things, and you're committed to the existence of numbers or necessity and things like that, and you're not prepared to give that up. So why should we give up the claim that moral facts are real? Anyway, so that's moral realism. An example of a moral realist that we've seen is W.D. Ross. He claims that there is just a fact about the world. And, of course, G.E. Moore, one of the two founders of analytic philosophy. G.E. Moore, whom we've seen arguing for the existence of the external world by waving his arms around, famously argued that for moral realism, and argued that any attempt to reduce moral facts to facts about the natural world, like utilitarianism does. Utilitarianism says what makes something right or wrong is how much pleasure it produces, or good if you're not a hedonic utilitarian, where this is measurable because it's a feature of the natural world. Any attempt to do that is just wrong-headed. It commits the naturalistic fallacy, says G.E. Moore. And G.E. Moore argued that G.E. Moore's sort of version of intuitionism was that we have kind of a sixth sense that can detect this real feature of the world, this wrongness that is out in the world. So this is our intuition. The kind of intuitionism that Ross had, Moore's intuitionism makes our moral sense like one of our senses. So he's kind of an empiricist intuitionist. Ross, on the other hand, made our moral intuitions more like a rational feature. He compares it with our ability to tell that something is wrong with our ability to tell that 2 + 2 = 4, or that modus ponens is valid. So it's more like a faculty of reasoning. But both of them are saying that there's a real feature of the world that we can detect. Now, Ross might be on firmer ground because he can say, look, validity is not something that physics can put under a microscope. 2 + 2 = 4 is not something that physics can put under a microscope. So why should moral facts be like that? Okay, so moral realists say that. And then it's moral realism, really, that J.L. Mackie is challenging. Because the argument from Queerness, as he says, has a metaphysical and an epistemological aspect. The metaphysical aspect is to do with the claim of what exists. So a moral realist says there really are moral qualities built into the world. The world comes with value incorporated. Value isn't something that we sprinkle on top of it. It's there. And of course, the most famous example of this view is Plato's view of the forms. So, for example, you can be a realist. There's objectivism and subjectivism about all kinds of things. The objectivist says the property that we're talking about actually exists. It's not a product of human observation. It would exist even if there were no humans. Subjectivists say that the world is one way and we sort of impose our subjective responses onto it, when in fact they're just in our minds. They're just byproducts of the way that we see the world. So, for example, consider beauty. The claim beauty is in the eye of the beholder represents a subjectivist view. It says, you know, what is beauty? Well, whatever you think it is, because beauty is just a subjective response. If you think crying clowns on black velvet are beautiful, why then for you they are beautiful, and don't let anyone tell you different. Whereas if you think, I don't know, Jackson Pollock splatter paintings are beautiful, go for it. They're beautiful for you. So subjectivism tends to deny that there's a universally applicable view, a right standard of whatever it is we're talking about. Whereas Plato, for beauty, would say, no, what is beautiful is what most closely participates in or approximates the form of beauty. Beauty is, at its essence, a real thing, the form of beauty, that really exists, that is more real than you or I. And if you think crying clowns are beautiful, but they do not participate in the form of beauty, you're just wrong, because there's an objective fact about beauty. And he says the same thing about all kinds of things, including, of course, moral values, because the highest form of the good, the highest form is the form of the good, which includes the moral element to it. So right and wrong, what makes things right or wrong is determined by how closely they approximate the form of the good. So that's a really robust form of moral realism. Now, so insofar as it is, it faces the argument from Queerness, which is that the qualities that you claim are in the world are totally unlike any qualities that we're used to, because they include this prescriptive element. Prescriptive is the shouldness. So descriptive says just how things are. Prescriptive says how things should be. And a prescriptive property is like the to be pursuedness. This is Mackie's phrase. That would be a property of something good. And conversely, something like cruelty would have to be avoidedness built in. What is that? First of all, so the first element to the queerness is that's weird. And then the second is, okay, even if such things existed, how would we know about it? What faculty? I can't see it, I can't smell it, I can't touch it. How do I know it's there? If you're telling me that a good person or an ethical person is seeing rightness and wrongness in the world and reacting appropriately, how are they seeing this? What is the faculty? And we've seen different answers, both intuitionist, Moore's and Ross's. And Mackie is kind of dismissive about that. He says intuitionism is kind of debunked now. He's writing in the 70s. Moore was writing in 1930. So, you know, there's only 40-odd years difference. But in that time, a lot's happened, clearly, including logical positivism, which would be very dismissive of intuitionism. But he says, okay, intuitionism just makes clear what any moral realist is actually committed to. So, you know, we laugh at intuitionism, but we should be laughing at moral realism in general, because moral realism has to explain. And he says, even if the intuitionist was right, even if G. Moore was right, his moral sixth sense doesn't do enough, because our moral sixth sense just picks up on the wrongness. But he says it would have to pick up the wrongness plus the natural features that define cruelty. What is it that all cruel acts have in common? And notoriously, it's very difficult to define what cruelty is in its essence, because things that would be cruel in one context, the same things in another context, are not cruel. Like, you know, what a surgeon does to people would seem horrific if it were not in the right circumstances. So what is the intrinsic essence to cruelty? We need to settle what that is, and we can't even settle what that is. That would be the natural features. So we need to be able to pick out the natural features that make something cruel, plus the wrongness that makes cruelty wrong, and also the connection. What is the connection between the natural features and the wrongness? All of these things would have to be detectable by our faculty, says Mackie. That's the epistemological element of the argument from Queerness. Now, other views about morality that he's not necessarily targeting are relativism. Relativism is the view that what is right or wrong is just what your culture says. So cultural relativism says that morality is in the same boat as etiquette. Etiquette says what is rude. And we're all relativists about etiquette. We don't think that there is an objective form of the rude. We think that what is rude in one culture is perfectly acceptable in another, and there's no one right standard. If you go to Japan, take your shoes off at the door. If you're in America, you probably don't have to. And, but what's rude in one culture is not in others. Cultural relativism says ethics is like that. What's wrong in one culture is wrong in another. Now, moral realist response to relativism is you don't really believe that. Because, says the moral realist, you, the relativist, are saying that slavery was not wrong. And then it became wrong. Why? Not because of moral progress, but just because a few people changed their minds. Because the other thing about relativism is it denies the possibility of moral progress. Because moral progress would have to say that something has progressed, you have to have an objective standard and say that this scores lowly on the standard and this scores higher, so this one is better. But there is no objective standard according to relativism. So slave culture is just different from non-slave culture, and you can't say one is better. And that just seems repugnant. But that might be our best bet, according to Mackie, because we can understand like institutional properties. If all you're saying when you're saying something is wrong is this goes against our standards, then there is a way to tell whether or not cruelty is wrong, is true or false. Okay, if that's what you mean, then maybe that's possible. But insofar as you're a moral realist, insofar as you think there's something about certain behaviors such that you could say they're wrong without even knowing what culture you are. You get in the TARDIS, you travel through time and space, and you observe one humanoid hurting another humanoid. If you can say that's wrong without knowing anything about your surrounding culture, then you're committed to moral realism, because you're saying that the wrongness is there and detectable without knowing any facts about the culture surrounding it. Emotivism was a view that that Ayer does a little bit of arguing for, and a guy called Stevenson at a similar time does, which is the yuck or yay theory of morality. It says moral claims are not actually claims with truth value. They're not expressing propositions. So a moral claim is instead just a way of, like Wittgenstein put it, it's a form of wincing. Saying someone's in pain is like a form of wincing. Saying something is wrong is like saying, oh, that thing, yuck. You're not making a claim that is true or false. You're just expressing revulsion. So saying something is wrong is just like pointing at it and say, icky. And saying something is right is like pointing at it and saying, it's kind of the emoji theory of ethics. That just seems wrong because, again, it has similar problems to relativism. It says that the same thing can be both right and wrong. And there's no moral disagreement, according to emotivism. Because if you say cruelty icky and I say cruelty yay, it sounds like we're disagreeing, but according to emotivism, we're not. Because it's like you saying anchovies icky and me saying anchovies yummy, that we're not disagreeing because we're just talking about ourselves or expressing our own tastes. And so we can both be saying something legitimate. But moral discourse doesn't seem to work like that, so emotivism seems an inadequate analysis of moral discourse. Now, this is the argument from Queerness represents a challenge. Essentially, you could put the challenge like this. Imagine, and I'm taking this from Stephen Law, who wrote a nice little introductory philosophy book called The Philosophy Files. He says, imagine you're visited by aliens, and your aliens have this amazing scanner that can tell you everything about anything in the universe, can scan it down to the last particle and energy wave. and you're giving them a tour around your hometown, and you say, oh, but you see an example of somebody mugging somebody, and you say that's wrong. And they say, wait a minute, wrong? We're not familiar with this term. Let's see if we can scan it. Tell us what it is, and we'll see if we can scan for it. And they say, we're not picking up the wrongness. Where is the wrongness? We don't get where the wrongness is. Explain for us how to perceive the wrongness. How would you do it? And the suggestion is you wouldn't, because there isn't really such a thing. And that's why everybody disagrees about it. If there was such a thing, like if wrongness was like poison, then every culture would say the same thing is wrong. Because this is a different argument that Mackie gives in his book, but it's a very familiar argument. If there really was wrongness was really a feature of the world, and we could really detect it, we humans had an ability to detect it, then you wouldn't see disagreement across cultures any more than you see disagreement about poison. You don't see some cultures saying arsenic is poisonous and other cultures saying it's not. Because of the way humans are made, the same thing is poisonous to all humans, no matter what their culture. But that doesn't seem to be true for moral claims. So doesn't that suggest that morality is invented, as in the title of Inventing Right and Wrong? In response, people can point out that actually there's a lot of commonalities between cultures. When you point at the differences, they tend to be superficial, like differences in monogamy or things like that. But, promise keeping, general commitment to honesty, general avoidance of needless cruelty, all of these things seem to be commonalities. So, that doesn't seem to be the knockdown argument that its adherents claim it to be. Okay, but that's the argument from queerness. Queer as in weird, the old-fashioned sense of queer. That means moral qualities, if they existed in the world, would be these weird things having this feature, this built-in prescriptiveness, such that if you perceived it, you would immediately feel yourself being compelled to do something. Like you would pick up, whoa, I just picked up the moral quality in that, and it made me do something, because morality is tied to action. It tells you what you should do. And he says that just doesn't happen. There you go. J.L. Mackie, The Argument from Queerness.